Well, hello everyone. Thank you for coming out tonight. I'm sure there's plenty of other options out there other than a program about glaciers, but it will make it, I think, pretty exciting. Some of this imagery we have is we're quite proud of. The technology we use and the way we can show you the world in a way maybe you haven't seen it before. Something that's really great about being in this room that's getting a little bit dark right now is, oh, by the way, Jamie, I do remember the interview at the Denver Museum of, it's now Nature and Science, right? And it was the Denver Museum of Natural History. It was for the Everest IMAX film. Well, somebody interviewed me there. It must have been you. Dick, are you okay over there? I mean, that's Dick Jackson, a local guy, climber, Himalayan climber, parapente guy. So you chose the in the house. You might want to move over here in a little while. So it's really wonderful. It feels more like a room of friends for me. Neil Beidelman's over here. Neil, how many years have you lived in Aspen? How many? Yeah. Neil did a wonderful job in leading people out of the huddle in 1996, recounted in a book called Into Thin Air. Janie Lowe here, been involved in climbing and the world of climbing for many years. I think I met you when I was 18 years old in Telluride. Let's see, there's a few others out there. Edgar Boyle is manning that camera back there. Edgar's one of our great alpine cinematographers, resident of Aspen since the mid-70s. And he and I have been to the Himalayas a couple of times together. So that makes me feel good. And other people in the room, I think, who care about mountains, care about nature, and know some of the places that I'm about to talk about. I'll make it quick so I can get right into the imagery, because we're an image-based project. So first, a little bit about Glacier Works, a little bit about why we're doing what we're doing, and then a little bit about what it means to me. Glacier Works is a very small nonprofit. I was the founder and director. It doesn't mean much when you're running a group of 3 or 4 people, but that's our small, hardy band, and that's the way we like it. Makes me feel like being with a small team of alpinists in the mountains, working with these very dedicated young people who don't get paid very well. The idea of Glacier Works was to bring people a new way of looking at the effects of climate change in a place maybe they knew very little about, and that's the mountains of the greater Himalayan region, which stretch from sort of northwest of Pakistan to Namcha, the great bend of the Tsangpo Brahmaputra in Arunachal Pradesh. So these glaciers have not had a lot of research done on them. They're hard to get to, they're remote, they're high, and yet they're very important to how we understand climate change in the region. So how do you study a glacier that you don't know a lot about? Well, the first data point of any glacier, the first good data point of a Himalayan glacier is a photograph. And those photographs were often taken during big exploration expeditions. The Duke of Abruzzi's expedition to K2 in 1909, the British reconnaissance expedition of Everest in 1921. And they weren't mostly climbers. They were scientists, geographers, geologists, map makers, glaciologists, people. They were all men of science, a lot of them, who were curious about their world. And part of that curiosity meant recording that world through photography. And a lot of the best photography came because they wanted to make maps, very accurate maps through big panoramic photography. It's called photogrammetry. So we decided that a way to show what's happening to these glaciers is to find the first picture taken of the glaciers. And because I've spent my 33 years or 34 years since I climbed Ama de Blanc in 1979 roaming around those mountains and making films, I knew where these images were. I just had to go out and find the place where the photographer had taken that first image from. And a lot of the places I knew how to get to, a lot of the places I didn't. That's part of the fun and the exploration and the adventure. But once you get those 2 photographs, what you have is 2 very clear data points. And there's an authenticity and a truth and a power to that imagery that, first of all, it's undeniable. Second of all, it doesn't need an XY graph to explain it. The way that so much of the climate science is explained to us is in a way that I hardly understand, because the data doesn't resonate with what they're talking about, or there is no imagery to support what I see in the charts. So we kind of launched this project with the idea of a picture as they say, worth 1,000 words. So 500 pictures, maybe it's worth a lot of words. So the imagery speaks for itself. It's not conclusive, and I want to make that point to you right up front. When you have two data points, you have a straight line on a graph. So there's a lot that happened in these glaciers in the intervening years than just a melt rate at that rate. And there's different carbon forcing, black soot on the glaciers I'll talk about in a little while. But at Glacier Works, we don't really have a position. In the world we live in today, and boy, I didn't know I was jumping into it feet first when I founded Glacier Works, there are a few subjects so contentious in our country. Women's reproductive rights, taxes, gun control, and climate change. And it's astonishing how we just stand on each side of the street and essentially hurl insults at each other, meaning you don't know what you're talking about, you're wrong. No, you don't know what you're talking about, I'm right. And so Glacier Works wants to know there has to be a middle ground. You know, the science and the evidence cannot, all the best facts can't be held only by one side. And each side has their legitimate interests and good science. So what we want to do with the imagery is trigger a dialogue, trigger intelligent discussions. Because one thing, final, before I start the presentation, is I've just, first of all, was astonished at my complete ignorance at the basic mechanics and mechanisms of what's causing climate change. And then I became even more astonished when I met very powerful people, as I have in the past 7 years on this project, who have absolutely strong positions in which you cannot debate their position. There is no dialogue. This is the position. It doesn't exist. This is the position. It does exist. And yet, when you wanted to get one layer deeper about, so let's talk about the science. Let's talk about the facts. Let's talk about the preponderance of evidence on one side versus a limited amount of evidence on the other side. No one could hold a conversation more than about 2 minutes because they only had a position. They had no good information. And that's where it sits today. So this information here has triggered a lot of dialogues. We now have an exhibit at the MIT Museum. We're very proud of it. It's hard to get into the MIT Museum. A team of geophysicists put you through your paces like you just can't imagine. And they make you prove yourself over and over again. That exhibit, you'll see pictures of it, launched April 21st. And it's in the right place. It's there on Mass Ave. You have Harvard here, MIT here, BU here. You know, people come and see it, people who eventually use this information to affect policy. We've had 26,000 visitors since April 21st. So that was a little bit more than I planned to say in the beginning, so I'll get right here into the presentation. This is how we normally see the mountain. It's beautiful. There's Everest from Kalapatar. It's, boy, we often see nature put out there in such a really, really beautiful fashion, but I'm going to show you a couple of things that aren't so beautiful here. So here's the area we're talking about and why glaciers matter. This is the Tibetan. Nobody started my clock here, so I have to push a button. So now I have less time than I think I do. That keeps me on time. This is this is a lot of Asia, the Indian subcontinent. You know, we're all familiar with this terrain. But what we're here to talk about tonight is the Tibetan Plateau. And look at this cursor here. I'm really not the person to pay attention to now. A landmass larger than Western Europe and the highest landmass in the world. An average elevation of 15,000 feet. Up here in the Chongtong, the northern plateau, the average elevation is over 16,000 feet. So why these glaciers matter is for two things. They have a very strong, clear signal-to-noise ratio in their response to climate change. They also provide water to rivers, fresh, clear water not a large volume of water, but important water to the headwaters of the Yellow River, the Yangtze, the Mekong, not so much water to the Salween and the Irrawaddy, but as the Brahmaputra, the Tsangpo Brahmaputra flows out of a glacier that I've visited here 80 miles from Kailash. Huge river, forms a mega delta here with the Ganga down here in the Bay of Bengal. The Indus begins its journey here near Mount Kailash. Very important river. Imagine a river that irrigates the largest irrigation network in the world. It's 8 times larger than the Central Valley in California. And all of its water comes from the Indus. Pakistan is at odds with India. All these countries are contentious neighbors. They're all nuclear armed. And the single most vital resource in all of Pakistan spends a lot of its time in India. What if India wants to dam that river, use this river to irrigate the Punjab down here, the breadbasket of India? So the rivers are important. They're also important as we go in a little closer here because of the stories they tell. If we're going to know a little bit about the future and what our future might look like, we need to look into the past, look at the present, and see where we're headed. So the match photography you'll see shows us a lot about the past. It shows us a lot about the present, and it gives scientists and others an idea of where we're headed. So we have had a very wide-ranging series of expeditions, and here's something very important I want you to remember. It's a big range. Right up here, this is close to the Hindu Kush and the southern Pamir. This would be northwestern Colorado, right here. And over here would be Orlando, Florida. So this is a very, very big range. Anyone who lives in the United States knows we have different weather in northwestern Colorado than in, essentially Orlando, Florida. It's a southern range. Orlando is on the same line of latitude as the summit of Mount Everest. So there's 50,000 glaciers in this region, and their response to climate change varies from glaciers here that receive a lot of their snow during the monsoon to glaciers here that receive less snow in the monsoon and some during the winter, and glaciers in the Karakoram that receive almost all of their precipitation in the winter. And what that means, it's like having snowfall here in the summer. It melts and it runs off, and you don't get glaciers forming in Aspen in the summer. When you get your snowpack and you have good skiing on a good year, unlike last year, what you have here is glacier snow that falls in the winter and compacts and turns into ice. The reason I'm explaining this to you is this is a huge, complicated system. Scientists still don't understand what's going on in all of these glaciers except from remote sensing, which is sometimes a very imprecise tool to try and figure out what's going on Earth from either 22,000 miles away or 300 miles away, depending on the satellite you're talking about. What this means is that you can find a glacier here that's not ablating or melting or sublimating, whatever you want to call it, and it's relatively stable or maybe even advancing. The scientists will tell you a glacier is advancing, which sounds like an army moving forward if it's thickening 2 millimeters a year. And yet that one piece of information, that out of 50,000 glaciers that are melting at an increasingly rapid rate, and one report that says 10 glaciers in the Karakoram are thickening or stable becomes a tool to say the glaciers in the greater Himalayan region are stable and thickening. So it's a big, complicated area to study. 500 million more people will live between in China and Pakistan and India by 2050. They're going to need a lot more water, not just because of the increase in numbers of the population, but because when someone moves from a state of poverty to being middle class, it's roughly the equivalent in terms of energy consumption and water consumption of putting 17 new people on the planet. Here's where the project started on the north side of Everest in not that long ago for me, 2007. I was sent there by Frontline, the great PBS series. They were making a film on climate change. very small team. I didn't have any help. I hired 2 monks from the Rongbuk Monastery. These guys are born and raised at 16,200 feet. I knew they were fit for the job. And since I first visited this monastery almost 20 years before they were born, I'd seen these kids grow up, so they kind of knew what they were getting into. Here's a picture. That's a data point. That's George Mallory's picture during the 1921 British reconnaissance expedition, taken by him. He's not a map maker. He's not a scientist. He's tasked with taking pictures wherever he goes around the mountain in search of a way to the summit of the mountain to come back with a record of what he's seen. So our job then is to reoccupy the same place on the map precisely. And you can see when you watch this slow wipe across the glacier, I'll put the cursor here so you can see what's happening, that there's been a lot of loss of glacier from that spot. And I'll show you how, we'll tell you how much has been lost without having to put the Eiffel Tower or something out there in the middle of it, because it destroys our beautiful imagery and it takes it out of a sense of humanity lies in this water. So once again, there's where the glacier was in 1921. There's where it is in 1922. Let's go in a little bit closer. And here's the same glacier. Let's look at it there. And now we can see how much it's deflated vertically in however many years that is. So, okay, the project we're working on, you'll be able to put in all sorts of interactive overlays and graphs and etc. But what I want you to do is look at this ice pinnacle here, right here. And remember, the glacier was up here, okay? And so, well, how big do you think that pinnacle is? Well, here's how big it is with a climber on it in the upper right. So the scale is actually quite big. And the story goes on and on. The West Rongbuk Glacier, a very high skyline, Everest, Lhotse, Nuptse, Pumari. On the other side, for any of you that have trekked to base camp on the south side, right under there sits base camp, right under there sits Gorak Shep. So here's what's happening to the West Rongbuk Glacier. This is taken by Major Wheeler, the map maker on their expedition. So let's take a little slice of it and move in a little closer. Again, we take laser range finders, we have the picture, we know the glacier was there, okay, we point the laser range finder there, we know the glacier's here, and so this was 330 vertical feet. The West Rongbuk Glacier, the route used by the British to the base of the Mount of the North Col through the 20s and 30s, is suffering even more when you see all the tributary glaciers are just gone. It's just astonishing. When you stand there with the matched photograph, and before you even see this comparison, you can see what's been lost, and the glacier was sitting way up here. And what this means is the accumulation, the ablation zone, the melt zone, whatever you want to call it, is moving up towards the accumulation zone, and once those two meet, the glacier is dead. So I'm going to get through this imagery real fast just to show you where we've been. Here's Choyo-Yu, the world's sixth highest peak, 26,600 feet, a debris-covered glacier. All the glaciers you're looking at are covered with 6 to 8 inches of debris. This is the pass that the people from the east, the Sharwa, crossed with their yaks 700 years ago into the Khumbu, the Nangpala, to become the Sherpas. So Sherpa's an abomination of Sharwa, people from the east. It was even easier to walk over 700 years ago. And I was so shocked when I stood there at this high place and just saw a big lake where there once was a very big glacier. And even the Tibetans now who we meet and talk to are worried that their trading route over into Namche Bazaar in the Khumbu will be impassable. Here's the guys that go with us. They're hard workers. They're tough nomads and herders. And, you know, they're farmers too, pastoralists. And they know the land, they know what's going on, and they say things are changing. They don't need a thermometer. You know, they look at the grass, they talk to their grandparents, and we're just small teams on the go to 11 expeditions. And now we'll move over to Kachinjunga to a beautiful photograph taken in 1899 by Vittorio Sella. This is a very stable glacier. This is a very beautiful mountain. This is one of the great mountain artists at work, and we're happy to have mountain artists in the realm of photography, and we're happy to have his work here because at Glacier Works we started out as the project about art science and adventure. And so it's just a hole in the ground now. And so now we're far to the east. We've done our homework. We've done our due diligence. If I put this cursor here, there's no scale for you. But everywhere we look, the glaciers are behaving the same way. And this is Kanchenjunga, 5 summits here, 4 of them above 26,000 feet, the world's third highest mountain. If you look here, Sella did not have a really wide-angle lens. I sure wish he did, because there's a big glacier down here. But you can see the glacier here. You can see it here. Oh, it's gone here. It's just completely gone. So here's a shot of the one of the accumulation zones. You can watch the cursor there. And once again, you know, the evidence, that's another 300-foot vertical drop in an accumulation zone. The evidence just continues on Everest. There's, you really can't see much change in that picture. This is Norman Dierenfurth in 1952. We're not going back as far as 1921 or 1899. But if we go into a little closer here, foreigners were not allowed to the base of Everest until 1949. And the Swiss were the first expeditions in 1952. This is a big rock. Neil Beidelman and many people in this room are familiar with this rock above base camp. So a tent would be very, very tiny here. This is already about a 200-foot chunk of rock. But you can see what's happening here at the base of the ice fall. Just by looking in the span from 1952 until now, the way that this rock is being exposed. And then one last place we're going to visit, or we're going to go over to K2, and to the Karakoram, into the main Baltoro Glacier, which leads up to Concordia and the confluence of the Godwin-Austen Glacier and the Upper Baltoro Glacier. So at the head of this glacier is K2. Well, you can see the Duke of Abruzzi's tents here. They were a very big expedition in 1909. If you look closely, you can see some of his 1,500 porters here, right? Can you see them? And so you see that's just a dirty glacier, right? So you can just figure how big it is. I don't need to show you a laser rangefinder measurement. That's a big chunk of ice, and now it's all gone. You see, you're seeing across to the other side of the glacier. And one other very important place we went, I better go back because this was one of our best trips. It's a very important place on our planet. It's Mount Kailash, the holiest mountain in the world to all Tibetan Buddhists, the Bonpos, the Jains, and 1 billion Hindus. And it's sacred because of the rivers that emanate within 80 miles of its summit. And even here on the north side of this rather venerated peak, a picture taken in 1929, you can see what's happening to these glaciers. So that's just the picture of how this has been working. I'm going to quickly just show you. These are the people on whose shoulders we have the privilege of standing. Vittorio Sella. You'll see another one of his pictures. He took the pictures in K2, Janu, and Kanchenjunga. George Mallory, 1921. Bullock, the surveyor, and Major Morris Head, a surveyor here, and Wheeler. These are they're mountaineers, and they're very educated people, and they're scientists, I think, at heart. They came back with a tremendous amount of information. We have equally small teams. It's very, very hard work. Some of the fruits of our labors before I show you the interactive imagery, and it's going to go very fast. The RGS, the Royal Geographical Society, we built the exhibit to look like peaks with valleys and ridges, and we're just so happy that this place had by far and away the most successful exhibit in the history of the institution. You can see we can print the image is actually quite big. We printed them much bigger than this because some of the images I'm about to show you have 1 billion pixels. What makes us so heartened to continue our work, which always isn't easy, is when we see the people we're really talking to here with this imagery you're about to see are the people who can affect change. My feeling is the status quo has failed. They talk the talk. I don't see them walking the talk. These people have been raised with a different ethos. They understand the language of climate change. These people can have a PhD in 10 years, and do the hard work to understand how we're going to cope with what's coming. We've been very provocative with art. That's sometimes its message. Here's the world's highest outside art gallery. I set it up at 19,400 feet. I'm going to show you this up closer. We're challenging the idea of, is this sustainable? Our continued reliance, especially in two big countries who need this energy to uplift their citizens, China and India, is this reliance on cheap, dirty coal, and even relying on a lot more of it in the next 40 years, sustainable? So it was pretty interesting to put the imagery of the source of what's causing the problem on the place that's being affected by the problem. Here's our really magnificent exhibit at MIT. It's very pleasing to us that a lot of the people who are in here are students who are getting a STEM education. It's science, technology, engineering, and math. And they understand when they see these images that they're going to have a problem on their hands. And guess what? It's not going to be my problem. It's going to be their problem. So now we're going to move on to the interactive imagery. We have the old here, the film-based cameras. And it's it keeps us really excited to see the attendance and to know this exhibit's going to be there for 11 months. And that's just one more picture. We do also take the images. Sorry, it's repeating itself here, and it's probably my fault. By putting this together, I want to show you one more picture. I took the exhibit to the south side of Everest this year, and we also had an exhibit inside of a tent, and that's where we're headed now. And this is part of Coal and Ice. A small installation downstairs follows this subject, bits and pieces of it, where Glacier Works has a hard time moving into something as provocative of that, because then we become activists and advocates. And really all we want to do is put out the images, have the science tell us what the images mean, and take it from there. So we're really about this these days, because this is what youth want. The youth don't want to mess around with things they can't play with. And so our audience is a 15-year-old, a 10-year-old, or a someone who's going to use an iPhone or an iPad. So you have to give them things like this right here. And now what we're working on at Microsoft Research is largely interactive imagery. So here's what you can do when you have 3 billion pixels. Okay, first of all, you can get a look at Everest and a glacier from its ablation zone to its to the ice fall. And if you want to see where all those people, how many people were on Everest this year, then we'll come down. Let's start to look at camp. All right? Want to see who's at Everest nowadays, Neil? Well, it's not. I got to get it to do what I want. Sorry, it's a little fast. Let's just keep going up the glacier. So this is what teachers are finding is very useful, whether they want to teach geology, glaciology, high-altitude physiology. Because what I'll show you in a minute is how we can get you right down here on the ground and look around and get you inside of somebody's tent. So this is the expectation now for a lot of young teachers. Sorry, this all takes navigation for me to get through this. I'll show you how we're building it right here. Let's see. Okay, this is pretty cool. This is what we just did. I just have to click on the right thing here. Sorry, it's all these files. When you have something that's playing 3 or 4 billion pixels, you need to, it takes a lot of memory. So here's camp from, Neil's been up here spending the night before with his friend Scott Fisher in 1996. So we can play around with this. Really, we're not here to show you the climbers. I mean, we can show you the scale if you want. You see the climbers in there, right? And then we switched from what we considered low-resolution imagery to high-resolution imagery, which is right here. So again, we're finding that we have to have people in this imagery because most of our work is done without the need to show climbers. We're really not there to show all these people, but here we've increased our zoom depth so we can get you down there. but also we can start to look at the ice fall and see what's happening to the ice. So I know some of you probably want to see a climber. Well, by now all the climbers were acclimatized, so they were making the trip through the night up the ice fall. But let me find someone for you in here. Oh, there's somebody over there. Oh, there's someone right there. All right. And so, but what we want to show you is okay, so that we need to show you some scale. There's Camp 3. There's the Lhotse face. But here's an accumulation zone. That's where a great glacier gets its life. Snow accumulates, mass accumulates, the weight pushes it down over this cliff. And I can show you climbing if I want, but what I want to do is get you down inside our exhibit and show you how you can interact with the imagery in a way that makes it very compelling and keeps you having the ability to make choices and change the narrative. So now there's our tent we set up this spring, and now you're standing in front of the tent. You can go look over here if you want, but there's nothing over there but climbers and their tents. So here we'll put you inside of this tent here. And you can see what was the world's highest indoor art exhibit, because now you're inside our tent. All right? But the cool thing about being inside our tent, and when we're done with our project at Microsoft Research, is there'll be menus here about what glaciers you want to visit, about what place on the planet you want, on this part of the planet you want to go. But just say you chose the West Rongbuk Glacier right here, and you want to see the comparison photos. There'll be so many choices here. It's called a rich interactive narrative. But since this print is made from 3 billion pixels, if you choose in this tent to see this glacier, then you can start to interact with this part here and learn. If you want to learn about mountaineering, you'll be able to go up here and find out where they found George Mallory, where the great Tom Hornbein and Willie Unsold made their ascent up this couloir in 1963. Or you can get a sense of scale. We'll have many other ways of putting in scale. I always like our tents to show scale. This is a very hard target to hit. So here's an example of one of our camps here. These are tiny teams moving 16, 17 miles a day. So now we're inside the tent. Now when we're done, you can click on him and he'll start talking to you. His name's Tashi. He'll tell you a story of being a yak herder and a shepherd. And then he'll tell you about his concerns about climate change. And then we can click on this photo and move to another glacier. The way we do that in a different manner that I find more compelling is to get out of this. That's enough on the south side of Everest. And now we'll show you how we want teachers to use this and how they use it. So now wrong one. Well, I'll take you to the east side. Okay, so let's go to the gallery. There's the Rongbuk Monastery down here. Teachers use this to teach about Buddhism. People who rely on a lot of this water are Buddhists. We can pan over and see Everest up here, or we can go down and see the site of base camp these days. There's an army camp here now. This is where the British camped in 1921. But what I want to do is navigate over to our ice gallery here. So we're very pleased with the fact of how well we match the light, so you don't get confused, even though these two images were taken 3 years apart. There's no change in the light. You know where you are. And as storytellers and filmmakers, we don't want you to be confused when you're navigating this. You can go up the East Rongbuk if you want to here. I'm not going to take you there. I'll take you down in here into our ice gallery. And we have a dozen more positions on this part of the glacier. We have the measurements. But now you're looking into our ice gallery. So here's 19,500 feet. And this is a big exhibit we've had in Beijing, Three Shadows Photographic Center. The gallery itself was designed by Ai Weiwei and founded by Ai Weiwei. And here's our images sitting on the glacier, images from the coal and ice exhibit in Beijing. And so again, this is posing a question. How much of this is sustainable? This heavy use of dirty coal, black carbon deposited on the glacier from poorly combusted fossil fuels and other sources of energy. They reduce the albedo effect of the glacier. Some scientists say it causes them to melt faster. Some disagree with that. There's a remarkable lack of consensus amongst very talented scientists on this, and one of the surprises for me working on it is not only how there's lack of consensus, but how quarrelsome the scientists are with each other when their data doesn't, they don't share the same results. This is the last thing I'll show you because this is cool, of the interactive imagery. And then we're going to fly. Sorry, I can't navigate my own material. There's a lot of it in here. Okay, ice fall. All right. I have a good staff, and they put all this together in a hurry, and they rename things. And my memory doesn't remember everything that well. So now we're here. Now, what I want you to remember about this is, in a minute, I'm going to show you how you can fly here, not through a film, but through a point cloud. What we're very interested in is in the same light. It took us 10 days to get all these shots, but we're really stubborn, persistent filmmakers. When you look back down the ice fall, you know where you are. You haven't lost touch with the land and the light, which is, I'm sorry, when you click on those little balloons on Google Earth and a picture comes up, you don't have the foggiest idea of where that mountain is that you're looking at, where that valley is. So teachers use this to talk about the macro, the big size of the glacier, and they use it to show the scale with our camp, or I got to see if there's another target here yet, or they use it to talk about the stories in the ice, which really tell us a lot about climate change. It's the carbon trapped in the bubbles. So now we can go in and really start to look at the glacier and the ice. And so that, by the way, keep your eye on that, because that's as big as a dime, all right? And this is all in very crude form, but now we can go in and look at the bubbles in the ice. So it's a really, really powerful tool, because the more we can get youth engaged in learning in an exciting, engaging manner, the more that they want to learn and they become curious. I have a 10-year-old son, and he doesn't care about glaciers. He doesn't care about even that I've climbed this mountain 5 times, nor should he become a climber unless he violates everything that I want him to be. So, but I'll tell you, he knows a lot about glaciers in a 10-minute lesson that any parent can give him with this. So now let's fly with the point cloud, because this is when we're getting into really advanced stuff that we have the data, but even a year and a half at the best scientists at Microsoft Research, they haven't cracked the algorithms to put all this together, because a helicopter doesn't fly at 25,000 feet with 7 Canon 5Ds arranged in the nose, taking a picture every second. It doesn't fly on a straight and narrow path. So when you make a point cloud, you normally need differential GPS, you need an internal navigation system, you need a plane that's flying perfectly level and straight, and every time a camera goes off, they know within a cubic inch where that camera went off. They don't exactly know where all our cameras went off. We had a crude GPS system, so they have to reverse the math. But this is very primitive, because what we can play needs a big computer and a lot of RAM and just a lot of horsepower. So this is a really dumbed down version. We've taken out this guy. This is Pumori. If you've been to Nepal, this is Kalapatar. This is base camp. And now you're flying through data created from 3,000 images. This picture, the flights that we took, have 150,000 pictures. So eventually you'll be flying through something that's absolutely, utterly photoreal. This is getting pretty close, but I just can't stand it because it's kind of klutzy at the moment. But when it's done, we'll be really happy. They'll be done maybe in about a year. And then, so there's Lingtran, the Lola, the ice fall. Gets better. And we didn't pay attention to the data on this side. Now we're flying up the ice fall. Now, of course, this is not a flight path of a helicopter. Sorry, we didn't fly that close to the wall. Lhotse Face, Camp 3, South Col, Geneva Spur, a nice big turn. So right now they could process 3,000 images, and once they have 150,000 images, you can fly over and land at a gigapixel station, any of the ones I've shown you, and start examining your world in a detail which it's hard to examine even if you're there. It's a lot. We have stations up and down this glacier. We can put you in 40 different places on this glacier alone. So that's a flight. And I could show it one more time if you want. Okay. Does it look good on the screen? I can't see it. So there's Kalapatara, the trail up there. So there's a gigapixel station there. You've already seen the view. You've seen the view from there. You've seen the view from there. We have 30 more here. And it's really for teachers, and it's really for an education with the math problems and things that will be presented here and posed, related to more carbon in the air, different scenarios for carbon in the air. How does that force melting of the glaciers? How does that affect the hydrology? How does that affect the health of the river systems downstream? We are not there to answer questions at GlacierWorks. We are there to ask questions. What does it mean? What are the likely outcomes? What are the outcomes we should worry about? Water shortages will cause social stress. Social stress can cause transnational migration. That causes instability. The people who are paying the most attention to this imagery are people in the intelligence community and risk managers on Wall Street. Because in 2050, with 500 million more people on the planet and a lot more tussles over resources, with 3 nuclear-armed neighbors, if one of them starts shooting at the other, these little blips we're seeing in the stock market over the Eurozone crisis will look like child's play. So the reason smart people are starting to take climate change into risk management for big pension portfolios, and those things are sometimes in the hundreds of billions of dollars. So understanding the scenarios and how to deal with the ones that are the biggest potential threats is what a service that this imagery provides. To show you what a flight will look like when it's done, here's just a little rendering of a very simple flight. So you'll see when the point cloud's done, this is what it looks like. And a helicopter can't drop from 21,000 feet, fly over 17,600 feet, and climb back up to 21,000 feet to get you into the Western Cwm. I think I had one more thing to show, because I'm right on schedule, actually. Yeah, that's great. Well, that's a miracle, actually. So let me see. Sorry, I'll find it. Oh, so here's one of the really big rewards. So we had this symposium that opened the festival, the Cambridge Science Festival, and our exhibit. And so we commissioned posters from Groton, the British school, the Latin school, elementary school, middle schools, high schools, to ask a question they wanted to ask about climate change in the greater Himalayan region, because we wanted to decorate this rather MIT-ish looking stage with art, and not just a bunch of whiteboards and the scientists draw on, and they don't have any imagery to bring the problem to life. So they did such a magnificent job that I promised them, I stood up and I said, "You're such wonderful and talented students. I'm going to take your banners to base camp and hang them on a pinnacle, polish off my ice climbing skills, and bring them back and present them to your class," which heavens knows why, but they got quite excited about that. And then even more exciting for me is a team of proper British girls in their knee socks and dresses and blouses cornered me in the exhibit and said, "Mr. Breashears, we're inviting you to be our guest speaker for our commencement talk." With sixth graders. I mean, it doesn't get any better than that, you know? And you know what? They're smart kids. And so here's their banners. There's me bashing my way up the mountain. And so here's what their banners look like. How do melting glaciers affect? It's a question. The rivers, the people. Is that Minnie Mouse or someone there? I can't see. But, you know, so there's one. Obviously, that's the middle. That's the grade school. Another one was, what language do we need to hear and understand that the melting belongs to all of us? Doesn't get any more interesting than that. The ascent of man and I guess the destruction we've wrought on our planet and that we can try to undo. Quite remarkable, actually. This one had a sort of a mandala on it, a thermometer bursting, and lots of things I can't see on my small screen. Mount Kailash over here. Maybe that's Everest, satellite surveying the Earth. And then at Groton, the idea of what's called the greenhouse gamble, which is, okay, we're going to put all this carbon into the air, and we're not going to stop putting carbon in the air. We're going to have a lot more carbon in the air in 2050. So what are we gambling with? How much increase in temperature will the Earth tolerate before we get into positive feedback loops, which then it's not out of our control, no matter what we do. So they came up with different scenarios as a constant, different growth levels. And see, when you get kids, bright kids, 15, 16-year-olds, solving these problems without framing it in the doom and gloom of climate change, they become problem solvers. They understand there are solutions, and they will find them because they have the talent and they have the determination, and they've grown up hearing about this language. So I probably don't have anything else to show you. I wanted actually, Neil, have you climbed K2? Yeah, I just wanted to show you guys what, if you really want to look at the Karakoram from where Vittorio Sella stood. We're looking back towards Urdikos and down the glacier. And we pan around here. And there's the Chogolitsa over here. There's the Golden Throne. There's Concordia. Just show you some scale here. Our camp's here somewhere. There's our camp in Concordia. But what's really great is when you know, Masherbrum, Mitre Peak. But when you start to see Hidden Peak, an 8,000 meter peak, Gasherbrum 4, almost 8,000 meter peak, Broad Peak, an 8,000 meter peak, and all the way at the head of the glacier, the great K2 and the Abruzzi Ridge. And to just stand, and really for me, to just be awestruck at the map they made and the photos they took and the record they made, and that our really humble pursuit at Glacier Works is to be a part of the continuum. We reoccupied this point, obviously. We have his picture from here. We now have good GPS points for over 900 stations like this throughout the greater Himalayan region, and we will do more. But now you reoccupy this point in 10 years, 5 years, not 100 years later, and you'll see rather rapid changes to the glacier. So we're more, some of our imagery is very original. We are the point cloud and the gigapixel imagery, but still fundamentally we're climbers and photographers following in the footsteps, the climbers' much greater and more talented and more pioneering than us, because we just want to be a part of the record so we can see what our planet looked like, just in case, you know, my son's son or daughter and this place goes to hell in a handbasket. You know, we have a record of the beauty and grandeur of these places when they were in really good condition. So now that's it, and I guess we have a Q&A coming up. Yeah. So there's a microphone out there, and we won't keep this very long. You know, it's 9 o'clock, and many of you have had a long day. So I know many people are fearful of the Q&As going on ad infinitum, but we'll keep it short and hopefully interesting. So do we have any questions? So we'll start with Sarah Holbrook, right there in the middle.
Hey, that was awesome. Thank you. So I understand the people who are climbing just now, trying to get up Everest, were having some trouble because there wasn't enough snow. And I'm wondering if that has something to do with these glaciers that are leaving.
The scientists claim that who haven't been on the ground, Glacier Works has visited more glaciers than most of the geophysicists we've talked to put together, maybe 20, because they're all involved in remote sensing. And they're absolutely adamant that there is no melting or sublimation above 18,000 feet, because it cannot happen, because the ambient air temperature is never above freezing. Now, you take people who climbed from the South Summit to the Hillary Step in 1983, like I did, when it was an easy route, in 1985 when Dick Bass, the 55-year-old Texan, could get across without a rope. No fixed ropes from the South Col to the summit, 1985. He had an ice axe in his hand. He went up and down, no problem. To today, when it's a really rocky, messy traverse, to Conrad Anker, whose opinion I trust and I really respect his opinion, being rained on at 26,000 feet on the North Ridge of Everest. So obviously, what the data the science has is not matching with on-the-ground observations of really talented, experienced people. What's happening on Everest up high it's hard to say if it's changes in seasonal snowfall and not directly related to climate change, because the scientists do have a point. At 26,000 feet, it's usually pretty cold most of the year. What's happening below 17, 18, 19,000 feet, it's complicated. Some of the glaciers are coming out of the Little Ice Age. Glaciers do melt. The question is the mass they're losing being replaced every year by fresh snow? So there's a lot of the melt rate we're seeing in some of these pictures over a long period. 30 to 40% of the melt rate is attributed to the glacier coming out of the Little Ice Age, which we all know the Thames River froze, in the winter for 8 years in a row. Now, once we get back to the temperature after the Little Ice Age, then maybe the glacier should stabilize. So then the question is how much the melting is being forced by carbon in the air. And it's being forced now, but what the best scientists say, and when you look at this geophysicist in MIT called the greenhouse gamble, is the forcing and the melt rate, the acceleration of the melt rate, the curve is going to grow very steeply. 30, 40 years from now, most of the melt rate of the glaciers will be attributed to warming caused by carbon in the air or black soot deposited on the glacier from the Asian brown cloud. There were other hands up before. Hi.
Can you talk more about the impacts, the potential impact? I mean, there's the nuclear standoff between Pakistan and India. I'm really concerned about the social impacts of the melting of the glaciers. Talk about drinking water. What's going to happen?
They need to do a lot more work to figure that out, because a lot of their numbers are off. Their numbers are off by sometimes 200% disparity in what we see from one team of scientists to another. So the big question is this. Okay, so the glaciers can tell us about the effects of climate change on the plateau. The glaciers contribute a certain amount of very important fresh water, perennial fresh water flow to the glaciers. That's important to remember. You know, I've been in these mountains now for the winter for the past 8 seasons, and you don't see a snowflake, all right? So there is no snowpack. So what's coming out of these glaciers, this flow is very vital in the winter. The glaciers continue to release water through the winter. So the thing that we're looking at now at Glacier Works is, okay, so if the glaciers melt and a big river loses 5% of its volume, is that volume relevant or not? You know, it's a grossly exaggerated sometimes that, and I hate to tell everyone this because I started out on this project with different information than I now have, but we've decided that the strength of a project is to be able to continually re-examine its position, admit when you were wrong, continually put out the best information, and stay on the straight and narrow. And right now, the scientists aren't sure that if these glaciers melt, what the downstream effect will be. Now, a river biologist will tell you that if a river loses 10% of its flow, fresh, clean water from a glacier, then that's less oxygen. The nutrient value of the river goes down. It's a different river. So then we get into big picture of how the ecology of the river affects people. Are the rivers going to dry up and go away? No. Get a lot of their flow from groundwater recharge, from big heavy rains in the summer, from a melting snowpack. But the interesting thing is glaciers do more than just supply water. So I'll leave you with this thought. They're a place for snow to sit and accumulate and be released over a year period. So take away all the glaciers, and that water that should be held there and released over a long period hits those dirty moraines, melts and flows downstream at a very rapid rate, and with a lot of turbidity, a lot of debris and dirt in the river, in the water, and affects the ecosystem of the river. Another thing is glaciers serve a huge role in their albedo effect. They reflect sunlight back up into the atmosphere, sun that would otherwise warm the earth. So when they shrink, more rock and soil are exposed. That gets warmer. It melts more ice. More rock and soil is exposed. And then you lose all this albedo effect. So the more we learn, the more we, at Glacier Works, the more that we have to be very careful about what we say and rely on what I mentioned early on in the conversation. We don't have answers. We want to start conversations where people come up with the answers, because none of us are scientists. We're mountaineers with climbers and a lot of determination sometimes. So one question over there, and then we'll probably have a couple of more. You can ask questions about the climbing part of it too. That's the fun part.
Well, I just want to say thank you. The images are really riveting, really stunning. Do you feel optimistic about whether it's this generation or the next generation's ability to stem this problem and to realistically solve it?
You know, I think once the young people get motivated, you know, every generation, you know, we've come up with problem solvers. There just has to be something at stake. There has to be a threat. And you know what, I'm going to live the next, well, I hope 30 years, and my life is still going to be fairly comfortable. You know, my house is not going to burst into flames because of climate change. If anything, my life will be disrupted by huge economic shocks caused by turmoil caused by climate change. But so it's hard, I'm answering the question in a big way here. It's hard to get people to respond to a perceived long-term threat, when these days it's bread on the table, pencils for my kids, are they getting a good education, what's going to happen with this economy? There's so many big questions that the climate change is just one big psychic burden to get off of the table. But right now these kids don't have to get it off of the table. They don't have all those responsibilities. So I think they're going to understand this challenge, and they are going to mobilize themselves, self-mobilize to create solutions. But they won't know what to create what problems to solve unless someone tells them what the problem is. And so that's what really needs to be done now. There will be a lot more carbon in the air. We are going to have a warmer planet. They are going to have to decide how are we going to live in that warmer planet. Keep this thought in mind. When JFK said we're going to the moon, forget what year that was, he said it would be in 10 years. We were on the moon in 8 years. The average engineer, which most of them had PhDs in Houston Command, the average age was 26. So they were 18 years old when they heard that message. So if we keep with first of all, if we get some leadership for these children, right? Some real solid leadership, not Al Gore, not here's what's wrong, but I want my big, fat, beautiful life. Because, you make the sacrifices, not me. That's what makes a generation so cynical, which is do as I say, not do as I do. And I'm not going to follow someone unless you set an example. So they need examples, they need leadership, they need the tools. So I really think, I have faith in that when this a certain generation sees a challenge, engineers, scientists, they solve problems. They come up with ideas. We just can't wait till the problem is no longer solvable, which is the so-called positive feedback loops. We all know what those are. And if you don't, then I'll briefly explain it. Did you have a question? Yeah. So you're supposed to wait for the mic. And then I'll tell you what a positive feedback loop is, because it's what should have you all worried.
Tell me more how the bit cloud was generated. Was that all on the ground cameras, overflights and planes?
The point cloud is
Point cloud?
7 Canon 5Ds arrayed in a 250-degree angle of coverage, one pointing downhill, not downhill, down, with 20-degree lens, with me sitting with the pilot on flight paths, and I'm triggering the camera either every second or every 4 to 5 seconds, depending on my the ground speed and the distance from the camera to the subject. The further away you are, the less you need to fire the camera, because you're not moving across the distant terrain. You have the same overlap. If I'm moving very fast across a nearby wall, then we're firing the camera every second. And by the way, we did set a world record for filming from a camera from a helicopter this year. They strapped me to the outside of the Curiel B3. We opened the door, and you'll love this, Dick. The B3 Plus. We stopped climbing at 28,100 feet. So now we can map the upper part of the mountain. But that stuff gives me nightmares, because we got all this data, not the flying is the fun part, but we have all this data, and the best minds at Microsoft say this is the best data set we've ever seen. And I just have no patience for the time it takes to develop all this software. But then they told me even at Microsoft, they held up the iPhone, and they said, you know what this cost? They said this cost about $1.2 billion. The patents that were purchased, the engineering that went into that little device has been going on for about 20 years. And I just say, well, turn on all those computers right now, solve the problem. So any other questions? And then I'll tell you what a positive feedback loop is, and we'll end on that. It's when, for instance, say the Earth gets warmer. Then say permafrost, which is one of the largest, if not the largest, carbon sink on Earth near the surface. The permafrost starts to melt. The permafrost releases its stored carbon. It also releases methane. Methane is a much more potent greenhouse gas than carbon. It gets up into the atmosphere. It warms the planet a little more. More permafrost melts. Now, there's a lot more carbon in the air, and suddenly nature, which had a really good balance between how much carbon it put into the air and how much it pulled out of the air, was about 350 parts per million. Then we came along and we put carbon in the air that we didn't take out of the air. But now once nature starts to put its carbon into the air in the gigatons, then no matter what we do, we can't alter the course of nature's then on its own path. So that's what the big thinkers, the geophysicists are worried about, is they call it again the greenhouse gamble. How much carbon in the air, how much warming are we willing to gamble with? Because you know what? The scary thing is nothing might happen. Maybe. I would love that to be true. Something big may happen. Hence, gamble. Are we willing to gamble with a really big thing happening? I don't think so. And most people don't think that being more effective in the way we live, in the way we consume energy, and taking carbon, putting less carbon into the air, that it's hard to see how there can be any harm in that. Right now it's hard with the economy and the fact that it is costly to make some of these changes. It's a legitimate argument. But that's what we have to be afraid of, and that these glaciers are a small, small part of a very, very big puzzle. I'm glad you took the time tonight to come here and see some of this imagery, and I'm very proud of the team that's crisscrossed the mountains, made over 40 ascents to 22 and 23,000 feet, over 70 ascents between 18 and 19,000 feet, and love every minute of it, and we'll keep doing it until our legs or hips give out. Thank you. All right.